In this presentation, we will calculate the return on investment. Our data is going to be up top where we have the A and B. These are going to be the two departments that we're going to be calculating the return on investment for. We've got the sales information for them both, the net income, the beginning assets, the ending assets. That's going to be our beginning information. Now, there's going to be two different ways we're going to calculate the return on investment. One, the easy way. Two, the more difficult way, but the one that's going to give us a bit more detail by breaking out that calculation into its component parts. So we'll start off with the easier way. I'm going to start off with the headers down here. We're going to construct this as we go so we can start to manage the cells of the worksheet as well. We will start off with the return on investment. I'm going to cheat a little bit here, but you can type that in. This is going to be method number one. I'm going to say A, tab, B. These are going to be the table that I'm going to start to put together to put this information in. I'm making the zoom go down. I'm at 180 right now, making that go down. We're going to then, I'm going to center these. I'm going to highlight these two, home tab, alignment. We're going to center these items here. And then we're going to say what the calculation will be. It's going to be net income divided by average assets. That's going to be the quick way to calculate this. So I'm going to say net income is going to be our first item. And the net income is going to be equivalent to our data. So our data up top is given net income 7,500 for A. And it's equal to the 2,442 for B. And then the next item is going to be the average assets. So I'm just going to copy this, or we can even use a formula. We could say in A10, this equals the average assets up top. And the average assets are going to be equal to, now we have to do a bit of a calculation to figure out the average assets. I'm going to do that calculation right now, and then we'll see it in more detail while we do the more complex calculation. So it's going to be the beginning assets, the ending assets, and then divided by 2. So remember that in practice, you're typically going to have the last year's financial statements, which will have ending assets. You know, it'll have the ending assets for last year, which will be the beginning assets for this year. And then this year's financial statements or this year's reports, which are going to have the ending assets. So you could take the ending assets from last year, which are the beginning assets, plus this year's ending assets and divide by 2. That's typically where we would get this information. In a book problem, they may just give you average assets, but you want to know conceptually what it means, or they might say something like beginning and ending assets, in which case we would take them both and divide them by 2. So we would take the 33644 plus the 23644 and divide it by 2. And for example, for A, we would get to the 28644. I'm going to do that with a formula, just one formula this time, and then we'll break that calculation out later in the problem. So this is going to be equal to, you would think this number plus this number divided by 2. But note you can't really do that because of the order of operations. It's going to do the division before it does the addition. So what we have to do then is put brackets around the addition part. So there we have it, and there we have it. So we'll do it for B as well. We're going to say this equals this number plus this number divided by 2. So the beginning plus the ending divided by 2. However, we're going to need to put brackets around the addition part so that it does that part first. So we'll put the brackets around there, and there we have it. And that's going to give us the ROI. So we're going to say here's our ROI. We're going to divide this out. So I'm going to say this equals the 7,500 divided by the 28,644 and enter. Now we get 0, and part of the reason I want to basically do this in Excel is just to format these items. Note that it's 0 because we don't see any decimals. If we go to the Home tab, Numbers, and increase the decimals, then we see the numbers here. Typically, we'll represent this in terms of a percentage, so we can add a percent, and then we could still add more decimals if we so choose, because it's not a straight 26%, adding more decimals. So just be aware of that. That's part of what we need to do when we start to format these items with relation to ratios and decimals. So we'll do the same for B. This equals this number, which is the net income divided by the average assets. Once again, we get 0. We could do the same formatting here. I'm just going to click on here though and then paintbrush it or format painter it by going to the Home tab, Clipboard, the paintbrush, Format Painter, and selecting the same format here. Now a little bit more formatting, if we just want to make it look kind of standard the way we've got our information up top, we can make these items home tab, font, color, black, and then the font white. I'm going to do this fairly quickly. And then highlight these items, right click the painter. We're going to use this blue, which might be in more colors if you don't see it there. It's this item, and OK. And then we're going to go to the home tab, font, and I'm going to put the grid lines around it. Also might want to underline this, highlight those two, home tab, font, underline with the single, and then maybe highlight these two, home tab, font, underline with the double. So there's just some standard formatting we might want to do. Now we're going to do the return on investment, a little bit more complex method. We'll call this method number 2. So I'm just going to cheat a little bit. Here's that. And I'm going to say this is going to be number 2. So we'll say number 2. And then we're going to say A and B is going to be the same. So this is going to be the same. And we can center that as we go. So I'm going to head and center that. All right, so the second method we're going to have is going to be the profit margin times the investment turnover. So we're going to break this out into profit margin times the investment turnover, and that's going to give us the profit margin calculation, the investment turnover, and the ROI calculations, all three of which can be useful with our analysis process. So we're going to do that, we're going to say it's going to be the profit margin, and then we're going to have the investment turnover. The investment turnover. Now, we don't know either of those numbers, so we're going to have to do something to calculate each one of those. I'm going to do that in a separate calculation. So there's going to be that. Now, also, you could try to format these and indent these as well. So if I wanted to indent this, this is colon, saying this is going to be what's going to be calculated. And then I could indent the whole thing, home tab, alignment, indent. And then indent the answer, home tab, alignment, and then indent. So I'm going to format this the same way. I'm going to highlight this. I'm going to make this black and white. So black and white. We'll make this, and again, this formatting looks the same as up here. So maybe I just highlight this whole thing. Home tab, clipboard, paintbrush, and then just paintbrush that whole thing here. And we'll keep it like that. Now we got to figure out what these numbers are going to be, which means we're going to have to calculate the profit margin and the investment turnover. So that's what we'll do now. So I'm going to calculate the profit margin. It's going to be here. Once again, we'll have A and B, and we'll center those items. Home tab, alignment, center. And the calculation is going to be including net income and sales. So it's going to be net income divided by sales. So we say net income and sales. And that's going to give us the profit margin percent. Profit margin percent. That's going to be our information. And I'm going to basically format this the same way as up here. So I'm going to highlight this whole thing. Home tab, clipboard, paintbrush. Highlight this whole thing. And we should paintbrush the same way. So then we're going to just pull this information up top from our information. So the net income is going to be equivalent to the net income for A, tab, equals for B, the net income for B. Then we've got the sales amount, which is given. That's going to be equal to the sales amount for A, and this is equal to the sales amount for B. And then we'll go ahead and divide this out. So we're going to say this equals the net income divided by the sales. And this equals the net income divided by the sales. Now it's already doing the percentages and formatting for us because we did so using the same formatting as we did up top, using the paintbrush in order to format for us. Okay, so there's going to be the profit margin percent. Now we need the turnover. Investment turnover, which is the second component of our calculation here. So we're going to say, all right, investment turnover, that's going to be the next item for A and for B. And that's going to be the sales divided by the average assets. So I'm going to say, all right, it's going to be sales. I'll do that with an equals sales divided by the average assets. So sales divided by average assets, and that's going to be, sales is given in our data. So I'm going to say equals in B24, the sales amount, and this equals up top our sales amount. For B, average assets, we don't have yet. I'm going to give a calculation for it so we can see kind of a formal calculation of the average assets. Let's go ahead and format this though. I'm going to say this is going to be investment turnover. And let's format this in a similar fashion. I'm going to highlight this. Home tab alignment indent. I'm going to indent this one again. Home tab alignment indent. Let's go ahead and make this black and white. I'm going to center these items. Home tab alignment center. Make these blue and grid lined. We're going to highlight these. Go to the home tab, font, blue, and grid line. I know I'm doing this fast. If you don't want to format the worksheet yourself, there should be a pre-formatted worksheet as well that you can just work through the calculations with. And then we're going to say that the average assets, we're going to calculate this average assets in kind of a formal process. So the average assets for A and B. So this would be one way. If we didn't know the average assets, we can calculate this. And if we want to show how we got to these average assets, then we can do it in this process as well. So the average assets are going to be the beginning assets and then plus the ending assets. And that's going to give us a subtotal. And then we're going to divide by 2. That's basically our calculation. So we're going to say, all right, beginning assets. And again, this is something we would probably get from the prior year statements because the ending assets for last year, the beginning for this year, this number. And then for B, beginning assets here, ending assets are going to be equal to the ending assets for A, ending assets for B equal the ending assets for B. Then we're going to sum those up. I'm going to add them equals the sum of these items. I'm going to use the autofill to autofill it across. We'll put our cursor there and autofill it across so it sums up those. We could underline here by highlighting these. Home tab, font, underline with the single. And then we're going to go ahead and divide this number by 2. So, and we could just type it in there. We could say we're going to divide by 2 just to really make sure that we have it detailed out. So anybody could follow this. So it's going to be this divided by this, right? And because note that a lot of times when you see this in a book problem, you would see this kind of calculation in a linear type format or in Excel with just a formula. So note what we're doing up here is the same formula we did here. And it looks a lot more detailed and expansive in this format. But this is a lot easier to follow and do. So when you actually put the steps out, you may want to work through steps in this format more so than you might think at first. So it's useful to do that. And when you show other people, it's really nice to break things out in this format as well. I'm going to go ahead and then autofill this across. So it looks like what we want. There we have that. Let's format this now. I'm going to highlight these up top. We're going to go up to the home tab, font. We're going to make it black and white. We'll center these items. Go into the home tab, alignment and center. And then let's go ahead and highlight this whole thing. And we'll go to the home tab, font, paintbrush. I'll make it blue. And then we'll put the grid lines in place. So we have that. And then we could do the indenting, highlighting these items, home tab, alignment, indent. And then I'm going to indent again, home tab, alignment, the totals. We could put an underline here, home tab, font, underline, double underline here, which is home tab, font, double underline. And there we have it. Now we can use these numbers to populate our average assets in the inventory turnover. So this equals these items, average assets. And now we can underline here, home tab, font, underline, and divide these out. So this equals the 22,392 divided by the average assets 28,644. It comes out to 1, and we should say, that doesn't help us much. Now this is usually not formatted in a percent, but a decimal. So I'll go Home tab, Numbers, increase the decimals. Again, we could put more than 2. We'll keep it at 2. Notice that it's rounded. And then we're going to say this equals the 15,498 divided by the 21,504. Again, 1. We're going to increase the decimals, Home tab, Number, increase the decimals. Again, it's more than 2 decimals long. That's okay. We'll round it to the 2 decimals. Note that Excel sees the larger amount if we use this cell in a calculation. It's not 0.72. It's going to use 0.7207 and so on. So then we can take this information and recalculate our ROI using the 2 components, the profit margin percent and the investment turnover. I'll also populate the average assets up top so that we have that in our data set. So the average assets are going to be equal to, as we calculated down here, the 28,644 and equal to the 21,504. So that's going to be our average assets. Now we can take a look at this and say, all right, the profit margin we calculated to be equal to the 33.49%. And again, it doesn't show up. Why? Because we need to add the percentage, right? So we go to the Home tab, Numbers, percent, and then maybe add 2 more decimals just so it formats the same. And then we're going to do that for B. B equals this number. Again, it's 0. We got to format it. Home tab, Number, percent, add 2 more decimals. And so now we look good. And now we're going to say the investment turnover is equal to the second calculation, 0.78. It came out to be 1. Why? We need to add decimals, not a percent this time. Home tab, Number, add decimals. For B equals the 0.72. We'll put our cursor here, Home tab, Numbers, add decimals. And then we can go ahead and multiply this out. We're going to say, all right, this equals the 33.49 times the 0.78. And that gives us our 26.18, which is formatted the same here. This equals the 1576 times the 0.72. And there's our recalculation of the rate of returns that we calculated in method 1. So again, a question could ask you for method 1 and a quick calculation, or they could ask you to break it out. You need to know basically both methods because a multiple choice question might make you or force you to use one method or another, or might ask you about either of these components of the rate of return. Obviously, in practice, it's nice to have the second method because both of these numbers are useful for decision-making purposes. The profit margin percent, the investment turnover percent, and of course the ROI.